The skies above New Denver burned crimson as the Zath'rathi warships descended through Earth's atmosphere. 17-year-old Maya Keller watched from her family's underground shelter as emergency broadcasts delivered the news: humanity had lost. After 8 months of brutal conflict, the alien invasion had succeeded. The terms of surrender were simple: Earth would provide resources and a quota of human workers to serve the Zath'rathi Empire. "They're calling for volunteers in Sector 7, Maya's father said, his voice hollow as he slumped against the concrete wall. The food reserves had dwindled to nothing. 3 weeks in the shelter had left them gaunt and desperate. "No one's volunteering for slavery," her mother whispered, clutching Maya's younger brother to her chest. Maya stared at the small holodisplay showing alien troops marching through the streets. Tall, reptilian figures with iridescent scales and 4 arms, each carrying weapons that could level buildings. Her father had been an aerospace engineer before the invasion. He'd explained how their technology was centuries beyond Earth's. "I'll go," Maya said suddenly. 3 pairs of eyes turned to her in horror. "Absolutely not," her father growled. Maya squared her shoulders. "You heard the broadcast. Families that provide volunteers receive extra rations. Medical care. Protection." She looked at her 8-year-old brother, his face thin and pale. "Ethan needs medicine for his lungs. This is the only way." The argument lasted through the night, but by morning, Maya's decision was final. She packed the few possessions allowed: a small pendant her grandmother had given her, a thumb-sized data crystal containing family photos, and the tattered copy of The Art of War her father had insisted she take. "Knowledge is the one thing they can never truly take from you," he'd said, pressing the ancient book into her hands. "Remember who you are, Maya. Remember Earth." The processing center had once been a sports stadium. Now it processed humans like cattle. Maya stood in line, her face expressionless as Zath'rathi guards inspected each volunteer, inserting tracking chips beneath their skin. When her turn came, a Zath'rathi officer with elaborate markings on his scales looked her up and down. "This one has spirit," he hissed to another in their clicking language. Maya shouldn't have understood, but she did, perfectly. The neural translator implanted in each human's brainstem was working. Good physical condition. Intelligent eyes. Send her to the Dreadnought Kazaar. General Vex'ahlia requested human females for personal service. Maya felt ice in her veins. She knew what personal service likely meant. But she kept her face neutral, even as they guided her toward the transport ships. That night, as the massive transport vessel broke Earth's orbit, Maya stood with hundreds of others at a viewport, watching their blue world shrink to a distant dot. Some wept. Others prayed. Maya did neither. Instead, she clutched her grandmother's pendant and made a silent vow: "This isn't the end of my story. It's only the beginning." Little did the Zath'rathi know, Maya Keller wasn't just any human girl. Her father hadn't just been an aerospace engineer, he'd been part of Earth's ill-fated counterintelligence division. And Maya had inherited more than just his stubborn will. She had inherited his perfect memory, his gift for languages, and his training. Since childhood, he'd prepared her for a world that might turn hostile, teaching her to observe, to calculate, to survive. As the stars streaked past the viewport, Maya's mind was already analyzing, planning, adapting. The Zath'rathi thought they had taken a slave. They would learn, in time, that they had captured something far more dangerous. The Dreadnought Kazaar wasn't just a warship, it was a floating city in space, home to over 10,000 Zath'rathi warriors and now, 500 human slaves. Maya quickly learned the rigid hierarchy that governed every aspect of life aboard. The Zath'rathi were a martial species. Everything was structured around combat prowess and honor. As feared, Maya was assigned to General Vex'ahlia's personal quarters, a vast chamber decorated with trophies from conquered worlds. The general herself was unlike any Zath'rathi Maya had seen so far. Taller, her scales a deep midnight blue with gold patterns that seemed to shift in the light. Most Zath'rathi had 4 arms, but Vex'ahlia had 6, a rare genetic variation that marked her as exceptional among her kind. "You will learn quickly, human, or you will die," were the general's first words to Maya. "I have no patience for weakness." The next 3 months were brutal. Maya learned to serve, to anticipate the general's needs, to become invisible when required and immediately present when summoned. She learned the complex Zath'rathi customs, their religious observances, their military protocols. And secretly, she studied their combat techniques. Late at night, when the ship's lighting dimmed to simulate night cycles, Maya would practice in her small sleeping chamber, mimicking the movements she'd observed during the day. The Zath'rathi fighting style relied on their multiple limbs and superior strength, advantages Maya didn't have. But she was quicker, more flexible, and most importantly, underestimated. The turning point came during a diplomatic reception. A rival commander, drunk on fermented nalat nectar, decided to sample one of Vex'ahlia's human slaves. When he cornered Maya in a service corridor, she acted on instinct. 3 precise strikes techniques she'd been secretly practicing, and the commander lay unconscious, his pride wounded more severely than his body. Maya knew the punishment would be death. Slaves who struck their masters never survived. She was preparing to make a desperate escape when General Vex'ahlia summoned her. "Explain," the general demanded, 6 arms folded across her armored chest. Maya stood straight, meeting those alien yellow eyes. "He attempted to violate me. I defended myself." "You, a weak human female," incapacitated Commander Draxol, a warrior with 12 victorious death duels to his name. "Yes." A long, tense silence followed. Then, incredibly, Vex'ahlia's mouth parts twisted in what Maya had learned was a Zath'rathi smile. "Perhaps humans are more interesting than I thought. Tomorrow, you will report to the combat arena instead of my chambers. I wish to see what other surprises you contain." The combat arena was where Zath'rathi warriors trained and settled disputes. No human had ever been allowed to set foot there, let alone train. When Maya entered, following respectfully behind Vex'ahlia, the warriors stopped mid-combat, staring in disbelief. "This human female disabled Commander Draxol with 3 strikes, Vex'ahlia announced. "I wish to see if it was luck or skill." For the next hour, Maya was put through a series of increasingly difficult combat tests. At first, the warriors were hesitant, afraid of damaging the general's property. But as Maya demonstrated unexpected agility and precision, they began fighting in earnest. By the end, Maya was bruised and bleeding, but she had earned something no human had before: grudging respect. "You fight well for a human," one warrior conceded. Vex'ahlia made a decision unprecedented in Zath'rathi history. Maya would be trained as a warrior, not as an equal, but as a curiosity, experiment to see how far a human could advance. What the Zath'rathi didn't understand was that they had just handed Maya exactly what she needed: access to weapons, combat training, and a position that would allow her to move more freely within their society. At night, Maya still clutched her grandmother's pendant, but now her silent vow had evolved: "I will learn everything. I will become stronger. And one day, I will free my people." As months turned into years, Maya's reputation grew. The human female who fought like a Zath'rathi became a novelty throughout the fleet. Warriors would visit the Kazaar specifically to test themselves against her. And as Maya won more battles, she gained more privileges. What no one realized was that Maya was playing a much longer game. Each victory, each scrap of respect she earned was carefully calculated. She wasn't just learning to fight like them, she was learning to think like them, to understand their weaknesses, and most importantly, to exploit the blind spots in their rigid, honor-bound culture. By her 21st birthday, Maya had risen to become General Vex'ahlia's personal combat specialist, a position that had never existed before. And she had discovered something that would change everything: the Zath'rathi weren't the apex species they claimed to be. They were foot soldiers for something far more ancient and terrible. 4 years into her captivity, Maya had transformed from slave to warrior. Her body was lean, scarred, and augmented with Zath'rathi biotechnology enhancements normally reserved for their elite fighters. Her reputation had spread beyond the Kazaar to the entire 7th Fleet. Some Zath'rathi had even begun using a name for her: Maya the Human Blade. General Vex'ahlia had become something unexpected as well: not quite a mentor, never a friend, but something complex that transcended the master-slave relationship. There was respect between them, and a wary understanding. "You still plot humanity's liberation," Vex'ahlia stated one cycle as they prepared for a planetary assault. It wasn't a question. Maya adjusted the neural sheath on her forearm, a weapon that responded to her thoughts, extending into a vibrating blade that could cut through almost anything. Wouldn't you, in my position, she replied. Vex'ahlia made the clicking sound that passed for Zath'rathi laughter. This is why I keep you close, Maya. Your honesty is refreshing. The assault was on Proximia 3, a mining colony that had failed to meet its quotas. Maya had participated in a dozen such disciplinary actions over the years, always careful to minimize civilian casualties while maintaining her cover. This mission should have been routine. It wasn't. As their drop ship descended through Proximia's atmosphere, Maya noticed something strange on her tactical display. General, these energy signatures, they're not consistent with mining equipment. Vex'ahlia leaned forward, her 6 arms working multiple controls simultaneously. Correct. Intelligence suggested the colonists might have acquired weapons. Something felt wrong. Maya had learned to trust her instincts. Permission to access the full intelligence briefing? After a moment's hesitation, Vex'ahlia granted access with a claw tap on her command console. What Maya saw chilled her to the bone. The intelligence wasn't about weapons at all, it was about an artifact. Something ancient, buried deep in Proximia's mines. Something the Zath'rathi Empire wanted desperately. The mission went catastrophically wrong the moment they landed. What was supposed to be a simple show of force turned into an ambush. Not by the colonists, but by something else, creatures of living shadow that seemed to phase through solid matter. Half the strike team was dead before they could return fire. Maya found herself fighting back-to-back with Vex'ahlia, their usual battlefield synchronicity the only thing keeping them alive. What are these things? Maya shouted as her neural blade passed through one shadow being, temporarily disrupting it. Dreadnought, Vex'ahlia hissed, her voice tight with what Maya recognized as fear and emotion she'd never heard from the general before. They should not be here. They cannot be here. They fought their way to the central mine shaft, pursued by the shadow creatures. There, in a cavern carved by both machines and something more organic, Maya saw it, a pulsing obelisk of black crystal, covered in symbols that seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly at them. The artifact, Vex'ahlia whispered. We must destroy it. But before they could act, a shadow larger than the others materialized between them and the obelisk. Unlike the mindless attackers outside, this being had form and purpose. It spoke, not in words, but directly into their minds. At last. A Zath'rathi general and curious. A human elevated beyond her station. The experimentation continues. The psychic force of the communication drove Maya to her knees. Through watering eyes, she saw Vex'ahlia prostrate herself. Great One, the general said, her usual commanding voice reduced to a whisper. We did not know this world was claimed by the architects. Ignorance is no excuse. Your empire expands too boldly. The terms of our arrangement are clear, and suddenly, Maya understood. The Zath'rathi weren't conquerors by choice, they were servants, bound to these architects by some ancient pact. The countless worlds they subjugated, including Earth, were harvested not for their own empire, but for these shadow beings. As the shadow entity continued to address Vex'ahlia, Maya's enhanced vision detected something crucial. The obelisk's pulsing matched the entity's fluctuations. They were connected. And the neural interface in Maya's arm was picking up the same frequencies. In that moment of clarity, Maya made a decision that would either doom her or change the course of the galaxy. She activated her neural blade's highest setting, a mode that would burn out the weapon, possibly her own nervous system, and plunged it directly into the obelisk. The world exploded into darkness. When Maya regained consciousness, she was lying in the cavern, the obelisk shattered around her. Vex'ahlia knelt nearby, one arm missing, golden blood pooling beneath her. What have you done, human? The general asked, but there was no anger in her voice, only wonder. Maya struggled to sit up, noticing that the neural sheath on her arm had melted into her skin, the alien technology now fused with her body on a molecular level. Where the weapon had been, her forearm now gleamed with a metallic sheen that shifted colors like Zath'rathi scales. I broke the connection, Maya said, her voice raspy. The architects, they were using the obelisk to control the Dreadnought. To control your people too, weren't they? Vex'ahlia's yellow eyes studied Maya with new intensity. For 10,000 years, the Zath'rathi have served the architects. We expand, we conquer, we prepare worlds for their consumption. Those who resist are made examples of. This has been our purpose since our own world was subjugated. And now? Now Vex'ahlia looked at the shattered obelisk. Now one obelisk is destroyed, but thousands more exist across the galaxy. The architects will know of this defiance. They will come for us, for you specifically, Maya. What you have absorbed from the obelisk has marked you. Maya looked at her transformed arm, feeling the power humming beneath the surface. Then we'll be ready for them. Vex'ahlia made a sound that might have been admiration. You humans truly are remarkable. You've been planning rebellion since your capture, yet when faced with a greater enemy, you instinctively struck at the true threat. Earth is still enslaved, Maya said, rising to her feet. So are countless other worlds. If the Zath'rathi are just middlemen for these architects, then freeing my people means defeating them first. As they made their way back to the ship, the only survivors of the mission, Vex'ahlia made an unprecedented decision. The Zath'rathi High Command must know what we've discovered. And they must see what you have become. The human who defied not just us, but the architects themselves. Maya looked out at the stars as their ship broke orbit, thinking of Earth, of her family, of all that had happened since that day in the processing center. They took me as a slave, she said quietly. They'll fear me as a warrior. The Zath'rathi sovereign worship hegemony was the heart of their empire, a vessel so vast it had its own atmosphere, a mobile capital from which the High Command orchestrated the subjugation of 1,000 worlds. No human had ever set foot aboard it, until now. Maya stood before the High Command, 12 ancient Zath'rathi whose scales had dulled with age but whose eyes remained sharp with cunning. Beside her, General Vex'ahlia presented the evidence from Proximia 3, recordings of the Dreadnought attack, the shattered obelisk, and most importantly, Maya herself, a human warrior with an arm that now pulsed with the same dark energy that had powered the artifact. Impossible, hissed Supreme Commander Zath'rathi, the oldest and most powerful of the 12. No being has ever absorbed architect technology and survived. Yet she stands before you, Vex'ahlia replied. And she offers us something we have never had before, a weapon against our true masters. The debate raged for hours. Some commanders called for Maya's immediate execution and a cover-up of the entire incident. Others wanted her studied, dissected to understand how she had bonded with the artifact's power. A few, led by Vex'ahlia, argued for a more radical approach, alliance. Throughout it all, Maya remained silent, studying the chamber, noting defenses, escape routes, and most importantly, the subtle hierarchies and tensions between the commanders. Her enhanced arm throbbed with power, occasionally emitting tendrils of shadow energy that made the guards nervous. Finally, Supreme Commander Zath'rathi spoke directly to her. Human. Maya. You understand what you have done. The architects have ruled us for millennia. Their technology built our empire. Their edicts guide our conquests. Without them, we are nothing. Maya met his gaze unflinchingly. With respect, Supreme Commander, that is precisely what they want you to believe. I've accessed the data in the artifact's fragments. The architects didn't elevate the Zath'rathi, they stunted you. They've limited your technological development, directed your expansion to serve their needs, and culled your population whenever you grew too numerous or independent. A shocked murmur ran through the chamber. Maya continued, her voice strengthening. Humans were not your first slaves, Supreme Commander. The Zath'rathi were the architects' first and most successful conquest. You're not their partners, you're their tools. Silence fell. In that moment, Maya knew her life hung by a thread. She had just challenged the foundation of their entire civilization. Unexpectedly, Zath'rathi began to laugh, a dry, rattling sound like crumbling stone. Do you know why no rebel faction has ever succeeded against the High Command, human? Because we are not fools. We have always known what we are to the architects. But knowledge without power is useless. He gestured to Maya's transformed arm. Now, perhaps, we have both. What followed was unprecedented in Zath'rathi history. Maya was formally recognized as a war strategist, not a slave, not merely a warrior, but an advisor with actual authority. A coalition formed around her in Vex'ahlia, Zath'rathi commanders tired of serving shadow masters, scientists eager to develop technologies the architects had forbidden, and warriors who saw the honor in fighting for true independence rather than serving as glorified slave drivers. Over the next 2 years, Maya's understanding of the architect technology grew. Her transformed arm continued to evolve, allowing her to detect and disrupt the obelisks that served as the architect's control mechanisms throughout the galaxy. Small, covert teams Zath'rathi and trusted members of other species were dispatched to key worlds to destroy these artifacts. Each success weakened the architect's hold and strengthened Maya's position. The human slave girl who had become a curiosity, then a warrior, was now becoming something else entirely, a symbol of resistance, but the architects were not oblivious to this threat. As more obelisks fell, they began to respond. Entire worlds went dark. Zath'rathi, loyal to the old ways, launched assassination attempts against the reformist faction. And the Vrek'nor, the shadow beings that served as the architect's direct enforcers, began to appear with increasing frequency. The breaking point came when the architects launched a direct assault on the hegemony itself. The attack was devastating. Half the high command perished, and the massive warship was nearly destroyed. In the chaos, Maya found herself face to face with an architect in physical form for the first time, a being of living shadow and ancient malice. You have disrupted the natural order, human, its voice thundered in her mind as shadow tendrils lashed at her. Species are meant to serve. To be harvested when ripe. To feed the great cycle. Maya's transformed arm blazed with counter-energy as she fought back. There's nothing natural about slavery, she spat, dodging its attacks. Nothing inevitable about predation. The battle between them shook the very fabric of the hegemony. Maya found herself drawing not just on the power in her arm, but on something deeper, a connection to the artifact technology that went beyond physical transformation. She could feel similar energies across the galaxy, could sense the network that bound the obelisks together. In a moment of desperate intuition, she didn't just fight the architect, she reached into the network itself, using her connection to send a pulse of disruption through the entire system. The architect shrieked, a sound that existed more in the mind than in physical space. What have you done? Maya smiled grimly, blood running from her nose from the psychic backlash. I've shown every enslaved species in the galaxy the truth. The obelisks don't just control, they broadcast. And now, they're broadcasting your weakness. Across the galaxy, on every world with an obelisk, the same vision manifested, the truth of the architects, their vulnerability to their own technology when turned against them, and the image of a human woman standing defiant against beings that had been worshipped as gods. The uprising was instantaneous and galaxy-wide. Species that had been enemies under Zath'rathi rule suddenly found common cause. Humans fought alongside Proximians, Altarians next to Denebulans. And most surprisingly, many Zath'rathi led by General Vex'ahlia joined the rebellion, turning against the masters they had served for millennia. The war was brutal and swift. The architects, never numerous to begin with, relied on fear and technology to maintain control. As obelisks were destroyed and their Vrek'nor servants cut off from their power source, they found themselves vulnerable for the first time in countless millennia. One by one, the architects fell or fled to the dark spaces between galaxies. Without their influence, the Zath'rathi Empire began to transform. Under the guidance of the reformist faction, reparations were made to conquered worlds. Slaves were freed. A new galactic council was formed, with representation from all sentient species. 6 years after her capture on Earth, Maya Keller returned home. New Denver had been rebuilt, though scars of the invasion remained. Her family had survived, her brother now a teenager, her parents aged beyond their years but alive. As she stood in the simple home she had left to save them, Maya knew she was a stranger to them now. Her transformed arm was concealed beneath a specialized sheath, but nothing could hide the other changes, the Zath'rathi bio-enhancements visible beneath her skin, the combat-hardened physique, the eyes that had seen worlds burn and gods fall. Can you stay? Her mother asked, touching her face gently, as if afraid Maya might be an illusion. Maya covered her mother's hand with her own, her human hand. Not forever. There's still work to do. Worlds to rebuild. Treaties to negotiate. She smiled softly. But I'll come back. Earth is part of something larger now, something better than an empire. Something we're building together. That night, as her family slept, Maya stood under the stars that had once seemed so distant and unreachable. She removed the sheath from her transformed arm, letting the swirls of energy dance across her skin, no longer painful or foreign, but a part of her, from slave to warrior to liberator. The galaxy knew her by many names now, Maya to the Zath'rathi, the architect's bane to others, the human blade throughout the former empire. Trillions of beings across thousands of worlds spoke of her with reverence and awe, but here, under an Earth sky, she was simply Maya, a girl who had once made a desperate choice to save her family and had ended up saving much more. She had entered the stars in chains. She had returned with the keys to unlock every shackle in the galaxy, and somewhere in the darkness between the stars, the remaining architects watched, and feared, and prepared for the day they might return. For they had learned a terrible truth: to make a human a slave was to forge the weapon of your own destruction. They had taken Maya Keller as a slave. She had become the most feared warrior in the galaxy, and she was just the beginning.